Welcome to Alice Just Alice 55. You're listening to an AI-narrated audiobook of my original work, The Child the Sea Kept, written by Alice N. Smith. The chapter playlist is linked in the description below. Now let's begin. Chapter 5. Age 12. The Omen. Silas believed in signs because signs had kept him alive. A gull flying low before rain, a rat leaving a barrel before rot was found inside it, a candle guttering blue before sickness took hold below deck, a dream of teeth before a fight, an itch in his scar before bad weather. Men called such things foolish until the sky split open or fever came crawling through the hammocks, and then they remembered they had heard a gull that morning and looked at Silas as if he ought to have warned them sooner. Silas did not mind being called a fool. Fools lived longer than proud men, provided they were careful about which foolishness they trusted. By the time Eva was 12, Silas had gathered enough signs around her to make a religion if he had been the sort of man who liked kneeling. He was not. Still, he noticed things. He noticed that dice went cold when she passed too near, unless a man was kind to her, in which case they sometimes turned sweet as honey. He noticed that men who mocked her tended to trip over ropes, split their palms, lose coins, or find themselves on the wrong end of the quartermaster's temper. He noticed that when she stood at the rail and watched the water too long, the sea usually had something unpleasant in mind. None of that proved anything. Silas knew that. He was superstitious, not stupid, but proof was a landman's comfort. At sea, a man did not wait for proof before reefing sail, checking knots, or moving clear of a rope that had begun to strain. Eva stood near the bow that morning, one hand resting lightly on the rail. That was the first sign. The day had begun fair, too fair perhaps, though Silas distrusted any sky that tried too hard to look innocent. The sun was thin but bright, the sea dark blue beneath it, and the wind steady enough to keep the sails full without making the rigging complain. Men worked with the lazy irritation of sailors who had nothing immediate to fear and resented the lack of drama. Silas had been mending a line near the foremast when he saw her. She was not where she ought to be. At 12, Eva was taller than she had been, though still narrow in a way that made her seem built from rope and shadow. Her dark hair was tied back, her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. She no longer looked like a child someone had dragged half dead from the water, but neither did she look like any ordinary girl Silas had known. Ordinary girls did not stand so still while ships breathed beneath them. Silas paused with the line in his hands. Eva watched the sea ahead, not the horizon, but the water itself. Silas looked too and saw waves, sunlight, and a scrap of weed spinning past the hull. Nothing else. That was the second sign. Eva always saw something before other people did. Silas glanced toward the quarterdeck. The captain stood near the helm, speaking with the quartermaster. The quartermaster had his arms crossed, which meant he disapproved of something, though Silas had long suspected the man disapproved of sunrise on principle. A sailor passed Silas carrying a coil of rope. "What are you staring at?" Silas nodded toward Eva. "Her." The sailor followed his gaze, then grimaced. "Don't do that." Silas glanced at him. "Do what?" "Stare at her," the sailor said. "Invites notice." Silas looked back at Eva. "She already notices everything." The sailor swallowed. "That is not a comforting answer." "No," Silas said. "Comforting answers are for priests and liars." The sailor crossed himself with 2 fingers and moved on. Silas went back to the line, but his hands had lost their rhythm. He had seen men try to make Eva into one thing or another: curse, luck, ghost, pet, weapon, omen, child. She resisted all of it by giving them so little to hold. She did not argue when men whispered. She did not smile when they tried to soften her. She did not flinch when they tested whether the rumors were true. That was what frightened Silas most. Not that Eva was strange, but that she was patient. A man could stand a curse if it struck quickly. Patience gave a thing too much time to choose where it would hurt. The first real unease came after noon, when the wind shifted not much, not enough for most men to look up. It was only a faint change in pressure, a wrongness against the skin, the kind of thing that made old scars mutter and teeth ache. Silas felt it along the back of his neck. Eva turned her head slightly, and Silas stopped mending. There it is, he thought. The sky remained clear, the sea still glittered. A few sailors laughed near the water casks. Someone cursed a gull for stealing a strip of dried fish. Above, canvas snapped once and filled again. Nothing looked wrong. That was the third sign. The worst weather often began by pretending it had no business with you. Eva left the bow. She crossed the deck without hurry, though men moved aside before she reached them. Silas watched her pass, a pair of sailors dicing in the shade. One scooped up the bones and muttered, "Not while she's near." Eva did not look at him, which made him pale faster than if she had. She climbed to the quarterdeck and stopped a respectful distance from the captain. The quartermaster saw her first, and his mouth tightened. Silas drifted closer, not because he wished to hear, but because wisdom sometimes hid inside eavesdropping. The quartermaster said, "You should be below." Eva looked toward the sails. The captain followed her gaze. "What is it?" Eva was silent for so long that Silas wondered if she would answer at all. Then she said, "The wind is wrong." Her voice was quiet. It should not have carried, but it did, and a few nearby men stopped working. The quartermaster looked at the sky. "The wind is steady." Eva said nothing. The captain asked, "Wrong how?" Ava's eyes moved toward the water off the starboard side, then back to the sails. Her fingers curled once at her side, as if holding something invisible, and Silas held his breath. "It is coming from beneath," Eva said. One sailor laughed before he could stop himself, but no one joined him. The quartermaster's expression hardened. "Wind does not come from beneath." Eva looked at him, and the sailor who had laughed found sudden business elsewhere. The captain stepped to the rail and watched the sea for a long moment. Then he looked up at the sky, the sails, and the faint smear of cloud low and far in the east. Silas saw nothing worth changing course over, and that did not comfort him. The captain said, "Bring us south by 2 points." The quartermaster turned sharply. "Captain." The captain did not look at him. "Do it." The quartermaster's jaw worked once. Then he gave the order. The deck shifted from laziness to motion. Men hauled lines. The sails shuddered. The ship leaned into the change, slow and reluctant at first, then cleaner as the new course took hold. Silas looked toward Eva. She had already stepped down from the quarterdeck. "Did she just tell the wind on itself?" a sailor whispered beside him. Silas said, "Best not phrase it that way, where it can hear you." The sailor stared at him. "The wind," Silas clarified. The sailor moved away, and for the next hour, nothing happened. That was almost worse. Men glanced at Eva, then at the captain, then at the sky. The quartermaster stalked the deck with an expression that dared any man to mention children, omens, or wind from beneath. The captain remained near the helm, watching the horizon as if waiting for a debt to come due. Silas tried to work and failed. He tied the same knot 3 times and mistrusted it each time. By mid-afternoon, the light changed. It did not darken, not at first. It thinned. The shine went out of the water. The blue sea turned the color of old iron. Gulls vanished, and the air grew warm in a way that felt trapped, as if the world had shut a door. Men stopped laughing. Silas looked toward the east, where a black line had appeared, low and hard. The quartermaster saw it too, and his mouth went flat. The captain gave orders before anyone could ask if the child had been right. Then the storm came. It did not arrive like rain. Rain was honest. Rain announced itself, fell, soaked, passed. This came like an ambush. Wind slammed the ship sideways hard enough to throw 2 men off their feet. The sky folded over itself. Canvas cracked like gunfire, and the sea rose in ugly, uneven shoulders, striking from directions no decent sea should know. "All hands!" the captain shouted. The deck became motion and noise. Silas ran where he was told, grabbed what he could, and tried not to think about the fact that he had dreamed of teeth 3 nights earlier. A sailor lost his footing and slid toward the rail. Silas caught his belt and nearly lost his own arm for the kindness. "Up!" Silas shouted. The sailor clawed back onto the deck, eyes wide. Another gust hit. The ship groaned. Above, a sail tore loose with a sound like a giant being gutted. Men cursed and scrambled. Rain came all at once, so hard it seemed to rise from the deck as much as fall from the sky. Within moments, Silas could barely see from one end of the ship to the other. He saw Eva anyway. She was near the mainmast, exactly where she should not be, helping a younger powder boy untangle a line from around his ankle before it could pull tight and break bone. She did not shout. She did not panic. She moved with that same terrible calm she had carried since the day the sea gave her up. Silas wanted to yell at her to get below, but he did not waste the breath. A wave struck before he could move. Water crashed across the deck, cold and heavy, sweeping loose tools, rope, and one screaming man toward the scuppers. Silas hit his knees and slammed shoulder first into a barrel lashed near the mast. Pain burst white behind his eyes. When he looked up, Eva was gone. His heart kicked. No, he thought. No, no, no. For one impossible moment, he saw her as she had been 4 years before, small and gray, clinging to wreckage while the sea tried to take her under. Then a hand gripped the rail near the steps. Eva pulled herself up from behind a stack of secured crates, soaked through, hair plastered to her face, one cheek bleeding where something had struck her. She looked angry, not frightened, angry. Silas laughed once, breathless and half mad. The sailor beside him yelled, "What's funny?" "Nothing," Silas shouted back. That is the trouble. The storm worsened. For the next hour, the ship fought to remain a ship. Men became hands, backs, curses, and rope burns. The captain's voice cut through the chaos again and again, steady as a bell. The quartermaster seemed to be everywhere at once, dragging men into place, shoving fools out of danger, counting heads with murder in his eyes. Silas worked until his arms shook. More than once he felt the ship turn wrong beneath him, and each time the captain's earlier change of course came back to him. They were still in the storm, but not where they would have been, not quite in the worst of it. Silas knew enough of weather to understand that difference. A small mercy could still save a ship. Near dusk, the black heart of the storm passed north of them, not by much, but close enough that the clouds there looked alive, and the sea rose in walls before shattering white against itself, close enough that Silas understood, with a coldness deeper than rain, what would have happened if they had held their old course. They would not have survived it. No one said that aloud. They did not need to. By nightfall, the storm had moved on, leaving the ship wounded but afloat. One mast was cracked. A sail hung in ribbons. 2 men were missing. 6 more bled in places the surgeon would have opinions about, and every soul aboard smelled of salt, fear, and old rope. Silas sat with his back against the rail, breathing like a man who had borrowed air and expected to be charged interest. Eva stood near the bow again, because of course she did. The captain stood beside her this time. Silas could not hear what he said to her. Perhaps nothing. The captain was good at saying nothing in ways that made other men hear orders. The quartermaster stood a little apart, watching both of them. A sailor dropped beside Silas with a groan. She knew! Silas wiped rain from his face. Maybe. The sailor stared at him. Maybe. You saw what I saw. I saw weather, Silas said. The sailor nodded toward the bow. You saw her warn him. I saw that too, Silas said. The sailor leaned closer, his voice falling. What is she? Silas looked toward Eva. She stood small against the bruised horizon, coat whipping around her knees, face turned toward the sea. Lightning flickered far off, silent now, as if the storm had spent its voice. What is she? Silas had asked himself that question more times than he cared to admit. A curse would have taken them into the storm. Luck would have spared them from it entirely. Eva had done neither. She had seen something, felt something, known something. Maybe it was wind or water or the ache of old storms in her bones. Maybe it was the same thing that made gulls fly low and rats flee rot and Silas's scar itch before rain. Maybe the sea had kept her because it liked having someone aboard who listened properly. Silas did not know, and that was the honest answer. Unfortunately, honest answers rarely satisfied sailors. The sailor beside him crossed himself. She brings bad luck. Silas glanced at the broken mast, the torn sail, and the bloody deck, then looked at the living men still moving across it. No, Silas said. Bad luck would have let us keep our course. The sailor swallowed. Then she brings good luck? Silas watched Eva turn her head slightly, as if she had heard the question from halfway across the deck. A shiver came over him. Do not be greedy, Silas said. Good luck gets offended when named too plainly. The sailor stared at him. That is not an answer. It is the only safe kind. The next morning, the crew began telling the story. That was what crews did after fear. They turned it into something that could be carried. By breakfast, Eva had smelled the storm before it came. By noon, she had heard it under the water. By supper, she had spoken to the wind and convinced it to miss them, though 2 men argued whether she had threatened it or begged. Silas corrected none of them. He had learned long ago that stories aboard a ship were like barnacles. Scrape one off and 3 more grew in its place. Besides, he had his own version. In his version, a girl stood at the rail on a fair morning and saw death hiding under bright water. She told the captain. The captain listened. The ship turned and the storm struck where they would have been. That was enough. Near sunset, Silas found Eva sitting alone beside a coil of rope, repairing a tear in her sleeve with stitches so small and even that Thomas would have praised them and pretended not to. Silas stopped a few paces away, but Eva did not look up. Silas cleared his throat. "You know they're talking about you." Eva pulled the needle through cloth. "One says you called the storm," Silas continued. "Another says you chased it off. The quartermaster looks as if he would like to hang both opinions from the yardarm." Eva tied off the thread. Silas shifted his weight. "I'm not asking which is true." She looked up then, and Silas wished she had not. Those pale eyes made a man feel like every lie he had ever told was written somewhere on his face. He took off the small charm tied around his wrist, a bit of blue glass worn smooth by the sea, wrapped in copper wire gone green with age. He had won it in a dice game from a man who drowned 3 days later, which had seemed important at the time. Silas held it out, and Eva looked at the charm. "Storm glass," Silas said. "Not real storm glass. I am poor, not mysterious, but it has seen me through 7 years, 2 hangings, 4 fevers, and 1 misunderstanding involving a governor's wife." Eva did not take it. Silas sighed. "I am offering you thanks, child. Do not make it feel like confession." After a moment, Eva reached out and took the charm between 2 fingers. "For luck?" she asked. Silas almost denied it, but then he remembered he was not stupid. "For warning," he said. Eva looked at him for another long moment before tucking the charm into her pocket. Silas felt immediately less protected and inconveniently better. Then Eva returned to her sewing. Silas turned to leave, then stopped. "If the sea tells you anything else unpleasant, you might mention it before breakfast next time." Eva did not smile, but her needle paused, and that was enough for Silas. He walked away as the ship creaked beneath him, wounded but alive, and tried very hard not to look back. He failed once. Eva was still there, small and silent in the fading light, with the storm glass hidden in her pocket and the sea watching from every side. Silas crossed himself with 2 fingers, not because he feared her, not only because he feared her, because aboard a pirate ship, fear and faith were often the same rope tied in different knots. And from that day on, when Eva looked too long at the water, men checked the sky. Thank you for listening to Chapter 5 of The Child the Sea Kept. If you'd like to continue the story, the chapter playlist is linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next chapter.